Every culture has their own form of archetypal warrior hero. In Europe, the noble knight. In Scandinavia, the fearless Viking. In Japan, the honorable samurai. In China, the wuxia hero. But in America, we have the cowboy. The cowboy lives on as our country's most recognizable, romanticized mythological hero, so it's no wonder we see a lot of cowboys appear in our fiction. It would only be a matter of time before a gunslinging cowboy got added to the universe of Mortal Kombat, and honestly, it's the coolest, most refreshing idea in a long history of color-swap ninjas. At least, it's a good idea in concept. There's little wrong with Erron Black in the visual department, and I actually love the idea of a cowboy in Mortal Kombat. Erron pretty much hits the checklist of necessary cowboy costume props, although I wish he wasn't as brown as the rest of the game. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how horrible animation can ruin a good character concept. Starting from the top, Erron Black's stance. In a game full of bad stances, this is the sloppiest, laziest stance in the game. I generally regard a basic standing pose as the most boring stance possible, but Erron Black somehow manages to make even that look lame. He can't even stand straight without the Mortal Kombat drunken sway. I know his arm is supposed to be ready for a quick draw, but his arm and hand are so lifeless it's like he's hover-handing his own waist. This is not the posture of a gunslinger who's alert and ready for action. This is the posture of a drunk guy on a Saturday night waiting for his Uber driver to pick him up. There's no dynamic line of action, no point of interest, and it's just boring. The thing with gunslingers, especially cowboys, is that there's a certain posture that we associate with them. Wide stance, muscles tense, steady breathing, gun at the hip, ready to fire. Many gunslingers in fighting games fight with their guns drawn at all times, which is something I've always questioned about Mortal Kombat characters who wield weapons but don't have them drawn. However, for a cowboy, keeping a gun in the holster is also acceptable. A big part of the cowboy legend is the quick draw, a feat reimagined through fiction so many times that it's become near mythological. It's like the gun equivalent of Iaido sword techniques. To pay homage to that, Erron Black has a prep stance in his gunslinger variation called Showdown. And that stance is even worse. I mentioned in the last video about the 5-degree rule, how you should pose your characters to favor at least 5 degrees toward the camera, rather than to pose completely to the side. This is exactly why. You can't see shit from this pose silhouette. There's no negative space to see the arm above the holster, and because it's sideways, you can't even see the feet spread apart. If I were to pose this character, I'd focus his weight near the back, slant his hips, and raise his gun hand a bit higher, drawing attention to the gun at his hip. Nash in Street Fighter V actually has something close to what I do. If a lot of his motion comes from his shooting arm, which it should, then I'd like to highlight that back arm as much as possible, giving it the most range of motion so that the eye is always drawn to it whenever Erron does something with his gun, especially those cool twirly gun tricks. Everything should be dedicated to visually emphasizing Erron's gunplay and making it the star of the show, which actually brings me to a second problem. There is one more nitpick I have about Erron Black's visual design. His revolvers are tiny. This is a visual problem that actually affects his animation in a big way. You see, Erron's guns are scaled to the size of a real revolver, and real revolvers are small, slender guns. In something like an FPS, this is fine because you can see a gun's details up close and scale it appropriately. But in a fighting game, you're going to be viewing your characters from a constant wide shot. At this distance, a realistically scaled revolver becomes basically invisible, and you can't see what he's doing with them because he's usually firing from the hip and keeping his guns close to his body. It's especially bad during moves where Erron is bashing you with his guns. You barely even notice that he has guns in his hands, and he doesn't even gain any extra reach with them. Other fighting game gunslingers usually circumvent this problem by carrying larger guns. This makes the gun much easier to see in silhouette form from the distance that fighting game cameras are typically shot by. Even Chris Redfield's guns, which are realistically scaled in Resident Evil 5, have been scaled up in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 to become more readable. Any game genre with a vastly different camera position, be it a fast-paced FPS, a wide-shot fighting game, or a top-down shot MOBA, can benefit from clear, large weapon silhouettes. Take a look at these two animations. Which one is easier to read? If you don't want to scale your gun to the size of a giant 90s Nerf gun, then there's at least one other way you can make a character's guns visible in action. strong key poses. There's a good reason guns haven't appeared in mainstream fighting games for a long time. Bringing a gun to a fistfight is cheating. A slow-moving fireball is one thing, but guns are near instantaneous. So how do you make them fair? You can give them a limited ammo system, you can limit their firing range to odd angles, you can limit their hitboxes to just the muzzle flash, or you can give them clear and telegraphed key poses. Whether or not your guns are firing real bullets, strong, readable firing poses are necessary for players to even perceive that a gun is even being fired in the first place. For example, if you could ignore her ridiculous outfit, Luna Himeki from Vanguard Princess has excellent key firing poses that telegraph where she's aiming and where she's about to shoot between stances. We're going to be talking mostly about Erron Black's Gunslinger variation because it involves the most gunplay and also has the most problems. Erron's problem is that he rarely, if ever, holds a clear firing pose. His guns are back in their holsters almost as quickly as they left them. So I know, yeah, it's quick draw, it's supposed to be fast, but for the sake of animation, the viewer has to at least see the guns fire. Even Iaido characters hold their end poses before and after their swords come out. When you combine this unclear animation with the revolver's visibly small size, you end up with Erron flicking his wrists around with invisible guns. This becomes a huge problem in animation when Erron brings out his guns in the middle of attack chains. Not only is it barely noticeable that he brought his guns out, it's even harder to tell what he's doing with them. Now, I'm aware that originally Erron's animations were slower, and then at some point between MK and MKXL, the Gunslinger variation got buffed to be faster and actually playable. But this only further necessitates the importance of good key poses. If you have less frames to work with, a strong key pose will make up for any frames you are losing in the process. Another problem Erron has with his gunplay is how he handles recoil. Or, more accurately, how he doesn't. Even though gunfire is instantaneous, it can still be broken down into basic animation frames. Your firing pose is your anticipation, the gun firing is the action, and the recoil is the follow-through. Because we typically can't see the bullet in flight, the visual payoff must instead come from the act of firing the gun. Erron Black manages to demonstrate two polar opposite problems. Either his guns have no recoil, or he overacts the recoil so hard it looks weightless and fake. Recoil happens because of reverse propulsion. As the bullet explodes out of the barrel, the whole gun is kicked backwards rather than upwards. Since handguns typically don't have a buttstock to absorb the recoil, the wrist and sometimes the elbow are forced to bend upwards. Now let's take a look at Erron's command grab, Sand Trap. Notice how his elbows aren't being forced upwards like they should? The recoil should be sending his elbows into a quick jolt upwards, but instead the animation is so even and stiff, it seems as though he's just bending them on his own. Recoil is an explosion of force and a visual sell on a gun's power. Combined with their tiny size, it's no wonder why Erron's guns feel so puny in motion. So in my previous video about Mortal Kombat's animation, I mentioned a great deal about proper balance and weight and martial arts and all that. In regards to Erron Black, this raises the question, does all of that really matter to a character who isn't a trained martial artist? Yes, and to a surprising extent, no. One of my animation professors once told me that any animation that looks bad can always be repurposed for something else. Believe it or not, the slow, imbalanced, clumsy attacks that ruin the rest of MKX are actually effective when applied to one single character. Jason. He's a big, lumbering, undead giant who swings his weight around with wild abandon. There's still a few odd animations I'd personally fix, but otherwise, Jason actually looks good in motion. Likewise, Erron Black doesn't use Kung Fu. He's a pragmatic street brawler who fights like a scumbag. He throws dirt, he's got pocket sand, he carries caltrops, he's bringing a gun to a fist fight. He's not going to be balanced or precise. But there is a keen difference between fighting like a punk and fighting like a monster. A monster like Jason doesn't even really know how to use his body, so the flailing attacks help to make him look unnerving and out of control. Fighting like a punk just means you have no finesse, but you still know where you're throwing your weight around. In fact, animating an unskilled fighter who throws out attacks with nothing but raw power is a lot like animating a trained fighter, except that you have the opportunity to throw all of their weight behind their attacks and make them feel really heavy and really painful. In Erron Black's case, MKX's lack of weight in animation makes Erron's attacks look even more pitiful because now they're lacking finesse and power. Look at this rushing punch attack. He never manages to get his feet past his center of gravity, so now he's literally stumbling forward, carried by his upper body weight. I might say this is the worst looking attack in the whole game, and I end up seeing it a lot because in high-level play, the move is actually super good. A fighter being unskilled doesn't mean he can't be flashy, but he's got to at least try. At the time of this recording, NetherRealm had just released their first gameplay reveal for Red Hood in Injustice 2. It just so happens that Red Hood is an akimbo gunslinger, and wow. They have actually improved on everything I was just hashing Erron Black for. His guns are visually distinct and very visible, having chosen a silver finish to contrast his black gloves and brown jacket. His gunplay is slick and stylish, with distinct key firing poses and proper recoil to really sell the power of his guns. Not only that, but he properly pistol whips with the bottom of his grip as opposed to Erron Black, who slaps you with the barrels of his revolvers. I'm honestly surprised. Like, in a good way. If I've never taken the time to express the importance of animation to fighting games, then this is a good place to do it. Art in fighting games serves the crucial function of communicating ideas to a player without using a single word. I've talked a number of times about how important it is for a character's design to express everything about them in terms of personality and gameplay, but it's also just as important that it shows through in a character's animation. And today, we learned what happens when an animation fails to bring out a character's expression. We end up with wasted potential, a disservice that not only fails to do justice to a character, but one that outright destroys him. Erron Black, your chance came and went, but it looks like it's time for you to shuffle on.
And that's it for today's Design Shop. Hopefully this will be the last time I'll ever have to touch Mortal Kombat X. Feel free to discuss in the comments below, and if you want to hear me talk more about character design in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for more weekly anime and game content. I'm A.B.I, and let's see, as of now it's about 12 o'clock on the dot, and...
It's high noon.
Ah, shit!